You're watching Bread and Roses, a weekly political social magazine that's broadcast in English and Persian via New Channel TV. Hi everyone, I'm Maryam Namazie. Unfortunately, Fariborz Pooya will not be able to be with us in this program this week. But I will be speaking to you this week about the Women's World Chess Championship that's going to be held in Iran next year and the scandal over the hijab. A new film on Islam's non-believers by Deeyah Khan, an insane fatwa on naughty neighbours, and women cycling in Iran despite an insane fatwa. Don't go away, stay with us. In the week that passed, there's two pieces of news that I'd like to talk to you about. One is, of course, that Iran is going to be the site of the next year's Women's World Championship in chess. And the World Chess Federation has basically come out and said that cultural differences need to be respected and regulations need to be abided by, and that they're expecting women participants who play in this championship to don the hijab. And of course this has created a huge uproar, not just by women chess players but also by women's rights campaigners from Iran and elsewhere, accusing the World Federation of Chess of siding with the Iranian regime, which imposes compulsory veiling by brute force, rather than siding with the women's liberation movement, women's rights activists who've been fighting compulsory veiling for many decades. I think, this is constantly the sort of attitude you see with regards to the veil when these discussions take place. It's seen as a cultural thing, it's seen as something that needs to be respected, whereas in fact it is a vehicle to separate women, to segregate women, and it is a way of erasing women from the public space. And so we stand with the women chess players who do not want to wear the veil, who refuse to wear the veil, and we ask the World Chess Federation to look at this issue not from the regime's perspective, but from the perspective of women who don't want to be veiled and who've been challenging this for many, many decades. We need to be siding with women and women's rights campaigners, not Iranian regime regulations. These are not cultural differences. These are regulations that are imposed very often by brute force. Now, the other important issue that I'd like to talk to you about is a wonderful film coming out called Islam's Non-Believers. It's by the award-winning filmmaker Deeyah Khan, and it talks about the situation of ex-Muslims in Britain in particular, young ex-Muslims, many of them facing violence, discrimination, ostracization as a result of wanting to leave or having left Islam. And the film, what's important about it is that it also shows the links between the so-called respected community leaders and Islamists that are inciting hate and violence and discrimination against ex-Muslims here in Britain with this sort of transnational movement that is murdering those who are considered apostates as we speak. A final important component of the film is the fact that it shows that there are so many ex-Muslims. There are millions of us, literally, and it's a tsunami. There are ex-Muslims, atheists in every family, in every neighborhood, in every corner of the globe. I think it's an important film that will show an important issue that's very often hidden. And what we have to remember, that no matter how hard it is for people in Britain, that there are people outside of Britain and Europe who are facing the death penalty, who are facing imprisonment for being apostates, for being atheists and ex-Muslims, and that we have to show immense solidarity with them and to make sure that we keep the pressure on until we get rid of apostasy laws, full stop. Last week I was at a conference organized by the Center for Inquiry on Women in Secularism. I managed to speak to Debbie Goddard, who organized the conference there. Listen to what she had to say. Stay with us. Debbie Goddard, great to have you on our program. You've organized a Women in Secularism conference that went brilliantly. Tell us why you did that.
Well, this was the fourth in a series. I wasn't the lead organizer on the first three, but it was considered important to continue because the issues obviously haven't gone away. So with this specific conference, we decided to address issues like free expression. That was actually a big one this time. International Blasphemy Rights Day is coming up next week, September 30th. Obviously there's been a lot of attention focused on free expression issues, not just in countries where there are a large problem like Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, other places, but also on university campuses to be able to bring to often Western spaces the difficult issues that are happening in other places and to be able to critique and criticize them. And so we wanted to have that focus, also to show who's on the front lines of some of the difficult battles around the world. And I'm very glad that we were able to bring in so many women who are activists from different places. But yeah, the point is that people are doing amazing things. There are issues both within our community and outside. A lot of the people on the front lines are women. They don't always get the space to present, and we don't always have the space given to have women talk about issues that affect women. And when women aren't at the front talking about these things, sometimes we don't see them. So it was decided to do it again. I was really glad that I could be such a large part of bringing people together for this.
Why is, why the link between women and secularism? What's so key there?
Well, a big reason is that religion often harms women most. And we heard a lot of that this weekend, including from yourself particularly, from Gullah Ismail in Pakistan, that often when countries and cultures become more conservative, it's women's rights that are taken away. It's women's freedoms that are reduced. Women's voices that are silenced. So why that is? Because men have power, because men are the leaders, because when morality, which is certain kinds of morality which are tied to conservatism, increase, then it's women who need to be hidden away and silenced, because women end up being the radicals, because women's sexuality is seen as dirty and immoral and it needs to be put away and they need to be hidden. All of these things are connected. And so of course women in secularism. Who is harmed most and who needs to be fighting? Who is at risk most when they fight? Who doesn't have the freedom to be necessarily on the front lines without the blowback and pain and possibly being murdered? And it's women.
And why is there this need to make women's voices more visible? Why is it so important?
That's a good question. But again, I think women aren't always in the spaces where people are interested in these issues. That's, I think, for historical and cultural reasons. Who runs universities? Who has access to wealth? Who runs media? One of the great presentations this conference was about who owns media companies like Facebook or Twitter, and therefore what rules do they put in place about what's censored and what's not censored, what's inappropriate and what's appropriate. And so if we want to make sure, if we just let that be, these structures exist that put an undue burden on women and keep them from speaking. And so efforts like this are to lift up women's voices. Even within the secular and atheist community, we've had a long history of seeing conferences where the overwhelming majority of speakers were men. Often I think, particularly in the US where I have most experience attending conferences for the last 15 years, it's because we've highlighted philosophers, we've highlighted scientists, we've highlighted best-selling authors. If we draw from those fields, we will see men, because that's who has best-selling books. That's who goes into philosophy, particularly philosophy of science. That's who becomes a scientist. not just because women aren't interested in science, but because it's harder for women to get into science for many, many structural reasons. When we draw from activism, when we draw from people interested in education, all of a sudden we have many women to draw from. And so a conference like this, where we are pulling particularly from activists, from psychology, from the philosophy of education, it's not hard to find women. When we think about leadership, not just in the sense of who has written books that have a lot of, who get on the New York Times bestseller list, but instead like who has an impact in different kinds of ways, then we see all of these women. So we get to put them on stage at things like this and focus on why they might not have a voice in other spaces.
And this, the stress on, not the stress, what's the word, the focus. And the conferences focus on secularism as well, so one aspect of it is women, but it shows that secularism is important for women. Why do you think that's the case?
Because if women want to be free, then we have to challenge the religious rules and the ties between religion and government that can silence us. That includes Sharia law. Obviously, there's also a link between issues that affect women most. So one of the topics that came up multiple times in this was abortion. Katha Pollitt, who wrote the book Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, spoke on Sunday. A lot of the people who are pro-life in the United States are men. A lot of the people who are pro-choice are women. Why are people pro-life? It's because of religion. So if we want women to have the freedom to determine what to do with their bodies, to not be policed by the government, then we need to challenge religion. These are some of the reasons why secularism is important. Without it, women die, and women aren't free.
And CFI is the organizer behind this conference, the Center for Inquiry. Tell us a bit about what are some of the main projects that the organization is working on, what its aims are.
Man, CFI is big and multi-armed. What of the 500 projects do we focus on? Well, we have the educational arm, so we publish 2 magazines, one focused on science and skepticism, another focused on atheism, secularism, humanism. We also have advocacy efforts. We have an Office of Public Policy in Washington, D.C., based in D.C. Our Office of Public Policy director, Michael Dodora, actually has an international focus, which I find is very unusual for American-based secular organizations. But he goes to Geneva for UN events. He supports activists in places like Bangladesh. With International Blasphemy Rights Day coming up next week, we're doing another effort to raise money for our Free Thought Emergency Fund to help get people who are threatened in places like Bangladesh, secular activists, secular bloggers, to safe places and to support their families as well. I work with community groups and campus groups, so trying to help build communities for non-religious people to help advance science on the ground, but also to have grassroots efforts that we can support that can be mobilized to engage in advocacy where they are. So it's not just a national level or international effort, but that people can be involved in Michigan or Los Angeles or even in Kenya, where we have 4 campus groups, or Brazil. So we have right now about 300 campus affiliates. I'm also the director of African Americans for Humanism. We have about 28 affiliated groups. That's a very uphill effort here, as well as 15 branches in the US, another 17 international. So the community is the last part of what we do. Also, there are education centers. Community, education, advocacy are the 3 prongs of how we function.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Debbie Goddard from Center for Inquiry. I think Debbie raises some important points, one of which is the fact that secularism is key when it comes to women's rights. You cannot have a society that respects women's rights if religion has a role to play in that society, however small. the degree to which religion plays a role, that's the degree to which women's rights are violated. And so obviously when we look at theocracies, that is the, you know, the height of misogyny and abuse against women. Of course, there are many reasons why women's rights are violated. A system that puts profit before human need is also an integral part of that. But so is religion, And I think secularism might not be the answer to everything, but it is definitely a minimum precondition for a defense and a respect of women's rights. The insane fatwa of this week is from Saudi Arabia. It is from Ali Al-Hakam. He is from the High Scholars Commission. Yeah, that's what he is. High Scholars Commission, which advises the Saudi king. And of course, he's done a fatwa on naughty neighbors, you know, people who steal their neighbor's Wi-Fi. It's completely haram to do so, in case, you know, you have any ideas yourself to do it. And of course, you know, there are so many issues in the world, from child marriages to male guardianship rules, to women not being able to drive, being blamed for everything in this, under the sun. But of course, someone who advises the king and who's such an important religious figure has had to take time out to talk about stealing your neighbor's Wi-Fi. I mean, this is important stuff, man. I hope you enjoyed this week's program. It's been very, very strange doing the program without Fariborz Pooya right here next to me. So I hope you'll be able to join us again next week. I wanted to end with the slice of life and a video of women who are challenging Khamenei's fatwa, which says that women cycling is sinful and it causes all sorts of chaos and fitna in society. So I'm going to end with this, and I look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time and same place. Until then, goodbye.
کیشه من و مامانم ساکن تهرانیم و دوچرخه سوار حرفه‌ایم دیگه. دوچرخه سواری جزئی از زندگیمون شده. کیش بودیم که این خبر رو شنیدیم که آقای خامنه‌ای چی گفتن در مورد دوچرخه سواری ما و سریع اومدیم دوچرخه کرایه کردیم که بگیم ما ورزشمون رو کنار نمیذاریم، ما حقی که مسلمه واسه ما رو کنار نمیذاریم. مرسی.
Hi, I'm Maryam Namazie.
And I'm Fariborz Pooya.
We're hosting a program called Bread and Roses. It's a weekly program that's broadcast in Persian and English in the Middle East and North Africa, primarily Iran as well. And it's also shown on YouTube internationally.
And we've been doing this since last May. We're coming up to our year's anniversary, and
Yeah.
we've had quite a lot of fun making these videos.
We discuss taboo breaking, free thinking ideas. The Islamic regime of Iran has called us immoral and corrupt.
And that's why you need to support us. We are the alternative voice in Middle East and North Africa.
Of corruption and immorality. So do support us. Here's a short video from Patreon that explains how you can help us with even just $1 a week. That's nothing. Support us.
Patreon lets fans become patrons of their favorite artists and content creators. It's different than Kickstarter because it's not about one big project that requires lots of funding. It's more for bloggers or YouTubers or webcomics, anyone who creates on a regular basis. Here's how it works. When you become a patron, you're agreeing to give an artist a tip of an amount you set every time they release a piece of content, whether it's a new song, a video, or a recipe. You can set a monthly maximum to make sure that you're always within your budget. Choose an amount, enter your payment information, and you're done. Becoming a patron allows you to view and post in the artist's stream, and in exchange for your support, artists offer additional patron packages, which might include monthly Google Hangouts, music production tutorials, pre-sale concert tickets, or anything they can offer as a way to say thanks. Patreon, empowering a new generation of content creators.